yeah, it looks like. Yeah. Okay. So he's a World Economic Forum Young Global Leader and a Knight Bagehot Fellow at Columbia University, New York. He's an Aspen, Italy columnist and alumnus of the Australia-India Youth Dialogue and the founding member of the Sweden-South Asia Media Project. His recent research on Hinduism and technology will be published by Routledge in 2018. It's a hard press to get into, trust me. He's the winner of the PSF Prize for Public Service, an award earlier won by the late Indian scientist and the President APG Abdul Kalam. So after this formal introduction to the bright young author and speaker, I would like to say a few words about the topic of being Hindu. It is not an easy topic to write about, especially if your philosophical vision includes a doctrine of the immortal soul that goes from body to body, carelessly disregarding gender, even species. You know, where does this identity of being a Hindu attach to? So there is a certain dehiscence implicit in the identity of being a Hindu, which I think will put Hinduism in a different room than traditional dogmatic or other religions such as Islam, Christianity, or Judaism. This is point number one. Because I'm a scholar on religion in general and comparative religion, I'll make a few remarks about Judaism, Islam, and Christianity, and then Hindol can talk to you about Hinduism. In the West, we now believe that all religions arise from are based on a single text, a single doctrine, a single teacher, which demands from its adherents a kind of allegiance which is not there in Hinduism. It's something like it's like joining the yoga studio without any commitment. You come, you go, you don't, it works for you, you stay, and so on. So it's not that binding thing. So how did these religions arise? So the first religion, as you know, in this series is Judaism. Judaism interpreted the revelation, which is essentially an ethical revelation and an historic revelation, in the following way: that whatever the prophets prophesied was to be interpreted according to a certain sign, which is the coming of the Messiah. We all know that. So when Christ actually does show up, some people will accept him as the Messiah and some people do not. So Christian hermeneutics will begin by taking the Jewish texts but applying a new hermeneutics. The new hermeneutics will be the New Testament, the new interpretation. The Messiah has come, here he is. And those who do not recognize this, because they have good reasons not to also recognize Christ as the Messiah, because the Messiah is supposed to usher in world peace, and we kind of know that that did not fully happen. We are still at each other's throats, not as individuals, but back somewhere in our mind. So this is called supersessionism. Christianity supersedes hermeneutically or interpretively Judaism, and Islam will do the same thing, that Islam will, quote, refresh the message between God and his people in a more valid, current, and accurate way. When you're looking at religion as this private family conversation between three interpretations of a certain view of divinity, naturally the Indian boy will walk into the room and feel totally lost. You're like, oh, well, And a series of expectations are created about what Hinduism is as a religion, what God is as a God. And to add to this, Indians are also fond of quickly, either concretely coming into basic body practices, health, social practices such as rituals and marriages, or fleeing into the heights of philosophical speculation. So it's like, where is the Hindu here? You know, is it this ritual? Do they worship cows? Who's ever heard of such a thing? But these representations and problems aside, one particular thing that Hinduism brings to the table that we ought to recognize is inclusivism. That everybody does not have to believe the same thing in order to form a community of mortals. As far as the immortal soul is concerned, there is no room for negotiation. And as far as our mortal existence is concerned, it is free fall for everyone. Everybody is welcome to join the human family. And that kind of inclusivism and tolerance is something no religion can live without. And humanity cannot live without it. So the whole idea of understanding Hinduism is not to become a Hindu, but to become a human being in whatever imperfect way you can. And just sort of accept difference, plurality, and resist dumbing everything down to one kind or definition. So against this cosmic danger of fascism, I would like to welcome to the stage Hindol Sengupta. I'll let him talk to you about Hinduism. Please give him a warm hand.
I've got an accent. Good evening, Namaste. I'm really happy to be here. I actually didn't know until literally a few months ago that I would be in America, but here I am. It teaches me once again as a Hindu that the only thing that you know is that you really don't know anything. And to reconcile with that feeling is the journey. How do you reconcile with the journey that you don't know? It's very easy to reconcile with the journey that you know, and you can know, and you must know, and you will move towards knowing. But how do you reconcile with the journey that the only thing that you know is that you don't know? And I want to begin with the only fundamental question I feel that any religion must ask itself, and any adherent, any follower must ask of whatever faith they may follow, including capitalism, including communism, whatever be your faith. Because after all ideology is, in a broad sort of way, faith. You believe that Wall Street is salvation, or you believe that Karl Marx is salvation, whatever it is, right? And I think the only prism to look at this whole thing is whether, and of course we could debate what science really means, but even if we take a very simple definition of science, which is that anything that you believe in has to be tested on the basis of existential virtues. If that is science, then I believe the only way to measure or look at any belief or faith, and we haven't even come to religion at the moment, any belief or faith is to ask the question, well, is it scientific? Does it make sense? Does it make logical sense? Does it ask of me as an individual anything which I cannot at some level reconcile with my own understanding of morals and ethics and virtues and so on and so forth? Now, none of this entire argument is not my argument. You'll realize through my entire lecture, lots of my arguments are not my arguments because, I follow something called Hinduism, which actually no one knows when it started. Most people still grapple. Some say 5,000 years, some say 10,000. We don't know. And once again, we come back to the point where we began with,
one has to be happy with not knowing. Vivekananda, a man that most people have forgotten, but finally, I think these days some people are beginning to remember, a man who came to your country. And I write in my book that that's the other 9/11. You see, most people in America think of 9/11 only through one prism. What happened in 9/11? 2 planes came and crashed into the 2 towers. Lots of people died, and so it's one of the most horrible things that ever happened in America. But there was another 9/11. And I think the time is ripe that we compare these 2 9/11s. Why? Because in 1893, another 9/11 happened. What happened in that 9/11? One man called Vivekananda, who was really poor, who had to borrow money to come to America, landed up without, and he had lost his letter of introduction, so to speak, landed up in America and said, I want to speak at the Parliament of Religions. And as luck would have it, and it's a long story, which also involves him wearing the, I like to joke to my younger audiences, especially in India, that Swami Vivekananda as a man really understood the Indian psyche or the psyche of the East very well. Why? And they often ask me, why do you say that? Because he understood that in order to be heard in the East, you must speak in the West first. Because of course the East will not hear you until the West has accepted you, right? So he was a clever man, really a man with vision. So he came to the Parliament of Religions in Chicago, and Swami Vivekananda began by saying, brothers and sisters of America, he said, what is the one thing that we have understood through the faith that he follows, his faith? That at the end of the day, the refuge is that one single question: can we be accepting of paths that seem different from ours? And as an example, he cited that when the Parsis, or what the Indians call the Parsis, were thrown out, ran away from Persia because they were being persecuted, they came onto the shores of India. And what happened there? There's perhaps an apocryphal story there that they sent to a king, a local king, when they arrived on the shores of India. They said, we want refuge in your land. And this is particularly pertinent because, of course, we today are grappling with the idea of what is a refugee once again. So the Parsi refugees, when they landed in India, sent to the Hindu king word that they had arrived as refugees and they wanted refuge. So the king sent them a bowl of milk, and the bowl was entirely full. And if you shook the bowl even a little bit, it would spill over. And the bowl came to the Parsis, and then after some time it went back to the king, who took a spoon and put a little bit of milk in his mouth and declared that, yes, of course the Parsis are welcome to stay in his kingdom, and everything they wanted would be granted to them. What happened in the interim? The king had sent them a bowl of milk filled to the top, to the brim, suggesting that there is no place in my kingdom for you. How do you think you will assimilate? It was a question. You will read, and this is one of the things about my book that a lot of people ask me, every chapter of my book is a question. It's not an answer. And the king too sent them a question, that this is where we are, how will you fit in here? The Parsis sent back the bowl of milk having mixed sugar in it. So the king tasted it and realized that his understanding of assimilation and their understanding of assimilation was the same, and there would be no problems. And he welcomed the Parsis, and Swami Vivekananda in 1893 mentioned this example in Chicago to give the example of how assimilation really happens. How should cultures really look at each other? I think one of the fundamental questions that Hinduism answers today is, how should we look at each other? How should I look at you and how should you look at me? What do I learn when I look at you and what do you learn when you look at me? What are the questions that you ask me and what are the questions that I ask you and what are the answers that we discover? And all of those things, Swami Vivekananda said, can only be tackled if you question your faith through the scientific prism. Let me quickly read a little bit of what he exactly says, his exact quotes. And so somebody is asking Swami Vivekananda, Swami Vivekananda, by the way, met Nikola Tesla. Some of you would have heard of Nikola Tesla, the great scientist. Swami Vivekananda says, all science as it has its particular methods, so has the science of religion. It has more methods also because it has more material to work upon. The human mind is not homogeneous like the external world. One person will see most, another will hear most. So there is a predominant mental sense. The science of religion is based on the analysis of the human soul. It has no creed. Is religion to justify itself by the discoveries of reason through which every other science justifies itself? Are the same methods of investigation which we apply to sciences and knowledge outside to be applied to the science of religion? In my opinion, it must be so. And I'm of the opinion that the sooner it is done, the better. If religion is destroyed by such investigations, such scientific investigations, it was then all the time useless superstitions. And the sooner it goes, the better. I'm a Hindu not because my parents are Hindus. I begin the book by asking the fundamental question, why am I Hindu? Why do I keep writing the word Hindu in all these forms? Why don't I keep it empty? And I came to the conclusion that I don't want to be anything just because my parents and my grandparents and my forefathers were that. I'm not an engineer. My father is an engineer. My grandfather was a doctor. I'm not a doctor. So why on earth should I be a Hindu just because my forefathers were Hindus? I will only be something if it logically, through reason, appeals to me. Does it speak to me personally? And writing this entire book has been about asking myself the question, why does it logically speak to me? Does it logically speak to me at all? Why should it logically speak to me? And the beginning point of that journey, the start of that journey, is if something seems irrational to me, then why should I follow it? If I felt that Hinduism told me irrational things that were doctrinaire and I had to follow just because it was there and I had to follow it, then it doesn't work for me because that's not how I live my life. I don't want to live my life in a situation where I'm doing things just because it has to be done. And Hinduism really appeals to me because, and I keep saying this, some of you may be working in software, and this might be interesting to you. Hinduism is a bit like an open source software. And every individual casts upon that software their own personal app, so to speak. What do I mean by that? I mean that you have a sense of the divine. Swami Vivekananda said famously that every soul is potentially divine, and this is another thing which really appealed to me, that the beginning point is that you're not a sinner. Now, I don't have a problem in being a sinner, but I was glad that I wasn't, if you know what I mean, right? I was really happy that I wasn't. And it begins by saying, Swami Vivekananda was told that, we all begin as sinners. And he said, but you're not a sinner. And they asked him, but then who am I? And he said, but you're God. And they said, you're crazy. If you said this, he was famously told in Boston, if you said what you're saying 40 years ago here, we would have hung you from the first tree. And interestingly, thankfully, he was not in that age, so they didn't hang him. And he said, but you're not sinners. Not one of us are sinners. And I was very glad to know that I didn't, because of course, there would be sin in my life. I didn't want to begin by being a sinner. I wanted to deal with the acquisition of sin and then treat it, so to speak. But this is, of course, a funny aside. The other reason why it really appealed to me, or the Hindu way really appealed to me, is because it addresses one fundamental thing. If some of you read the historian Yuval Noah Harari, he's been talking about this. What is the one thing in the future that we will not have? That we will guaranteed not have? The one thing we will not have? 10 years, 5 years, in fact, even today we don't have, but what is the one thing we will definitely not have? Sorry? Privacy is one, and actually privacy is very intrinsically connected to the answer. Those things are connected very deeply. Well, actually, choice. In fact, even today you don't have choice. How are you shopping on Amazon? Well, the algorithm is mostly deciding what you shop. The algorithm is showing you each time what you might be interested in. And if you look at all recent research of behavioral economics, psychiatric behavior. The idea of free will is weakening more and more. We used to once believe that the free will is this great thing. We are all individuals and we have free will, right? In a world where already in Silicon Valley there is a group of scientists who are building an AI God, an artificial intelligence God, where is your free will? So the one big thing, and the historian Harari has been talking about this, that we will definitely not have is free will. So then he asked the question, if we are not going to have free will in the future, what happens to us? What happens to the ego then? Like, our entire idea of the self is based on the fact that we are something, right? I am this. And why are you this? Because you're an individual. You make choices, supposedly. And those choices are supposedly based on rational behavior and so on and so forth. But if we really don't have free will, then how are we going to deal with this thing called the ego? And he comes to the conclusion that, and the Upanishads would be, the people who wrote the Upanishads would be very happy. They would have hugged Yuval Noah Harari at this point, because he comes to the conclusion, and you can Google this up in this FT article that he wrote last December. He comes to the conclusion that the only choice is to know yourself. At this point, of course, all the people who wrote the Upanishads and the Vedas are clapping from the heavens, or the hell, wherever they are. God knows where they are. But, they're clapping hard for Yuval Noah Harari and cheering him on. Because guess what? He's essentially saying Tattva Masi and Aham Brahmasmi. He's saying in order to know anything, you must know yourself. He's fundamentally answering this question that for 5,000 years, maybe 10, the Vedic seekers and the Upanishadic seekers answered to themselves when they said, well, if you really want to know anything, you must know yourself. Where do you begin? You know yourself. And there is a very interesting article I recently read, and I want to answer that. Somebody wrote that, this knowing yourself business is terribly selfish. You just want to know yourself. What happens to your community? What happens to your parents and your grandparents, brothers and sisters and your friends and so on and so forth? Well, my argument would be, actually, you can only truly be a son and a daughter and a cousin or a husband or a wife or whatever you want to be, or a friend, better if you truly know yourself. I can truly be my friend Neha's friend if I'm at peace with myself. If I'm not, the demands that I make of that friendship will fundamentally be detrimental. And you don't need me to tell you this. You see this in your lives every day. That the demands that somebody makes of you, and in turn you make of somebody else, are essentially detrimental, even vicious, poisonous, because you don't know what you really want, and they don't know what they really want, and everybody is grappling with this, the algorithm running in their head, which is telling them what to buy and what to choose and what to even demand from each other. So in a straight line, ladies and gentlemen, I was very happy to see, from the long-gone Upanishadic seers right up to Yuval Noah Harari, the echo of, via Vivekananda, the echo of know thyself continues. And I am today a Hindu, and I keep writing in those forms that I am a Hindu, because it still continues. The day this message dies, I will keep those forms blank. I have no problems keeping those forms blank, by the way. I don't have an issue with it. I'm not doctrinaire about it. I'm not holding on, I'm not clutching on to this bit of identity. Because, the moment I clutch on to this identity saying, I'm a Hindu and therefore, this is very close to me, there begins my downfall. It's a steady decline from that point onwards. I was, just before coming here, I was attending a lecture given by one of the monks of the Ramakrishna Mission, the Vedanta Center at Columbia University, who was talking about particle physics and the study of consciousness. Some of you might know Stanford has a huge center of the study of consciousness now. And I asked the monk, who's a scientist later, that, Vivekananda started this Vedanta Center many, many years ago, and what has been your experience? He said, there's a lot of trouble. And I said, why? What is the trouble? He says, for 100 years, we've been trying to grapple with the answer, what do we do if somebody comes and tells us, convert us into Hinduism? He says, I have no idea. And for 100 years, we've been trying to find that question, the answer to that question. What on earth do we do if somebody comes to us and says, we want to be Hindu? If somebody comes to us saying that we want to be Hindu, we tell them, great, know yourself. But people are not happy often with that answer. Because people don't want responsibility. They want to take responsibility away. They want to give responsibility to somebody else. They want somebody else to take charge and say, okay, fine, you. every morning, 8 o'clock here. But when they come to us, we are like, well, great. I mean, just know yourself. But lo and behold, human beings are never happy being told that. I'm a Hindu for some other reasons also. Let's go back a few years when I was in school. Actually, more than a few years, but I'm still young, so it's okay. I was in school, and it was interesting. I was in school in this place called Calcutta. I actually grew up in a very wonderful place, filled with eternal joys of this wonderful ideology called communism. I was very happy to have grown up in the febrile and illuminous environment of Calcutta, where we were told wonderful things, including how we will all go to utopia, which we will. But there were other things that we were told in Calcutta, which is that if we worship idols, we will all die as sinners. I was very young at that time, even younger than I am at the moment. So death seemed very far away for me. So I wasn't really much worried about death. But I was told a lot that if I do these terrible things like worshipping idols and so on and so forth, it'll be horrible for me. And eternal hell awaits me. Though, I mean, I actually asked one of the people who were telling me this one day that, actually, to be honest, hell sounds slightly more fun than heaven, though. They were not very happy with that idea. But anyway, be that as it may, there was this one moment where somebody was telling us very ardently that you're going to go to hell, these terrible things that you guys do, and you worship all these idols and so on and so forth. And the next moment, and this was in my school, an announcement came that we would be going into 10-day holiday of Durga Puja in Calcutta. Now, Durga Puja, as some of you would know, is this 10-day gargantuan, Tomatina festival meets, I don't know, every masquerade ball of every Ivy League coming together in this gigantic festival of idol worship. And the dichotomy of these two things simultaneously seemed odd to me, which is where I began to question this idea that why was I doing these terrible things? Like, why was I worshipping these terrible idols, and what do they really mean to me, and why should I even do it? What do these idols even mean? Should I actually be worshipping them at all, and so on and so forth? So I went in usually to the place where all Indian men go when they're in distress, which is, many of you would know, is to their mother. Always. If you're an Indian man, when in doubt, you go to your mom. So I went and told my mother that, this is terrible, I'm going to go to hell, I'm doing these horrible things, and there is no hope for me. Eternal damnation awaits. My mother has very healthy skepticism about everything that I do, which I think is the first and primary duty of a parent, to have healthy skepticism about your children. So my mother told me that, so what do you want to do? I said, well, I don't want to really worship these idols and stuff because, they are horrible and, they're not going to do anything good for me. So she said, okay, don't. Now, that was a really disturbing answer for me because this is not the answer I wanted to hear. I wanted a solution, right? I wanted to be told what to do. So I was like, no, but what do you mean? Like, what do you mean don't? She said, well, don't. I mean, if you don't like it and it's not working for you, don't do it. I was like, no, but I mean, everybody does it. She was like, yeah, but, you don't have to be everybody. You don't do it. From there onwards began the journey of really writing this book for me. And it's a straight line from that point to a book that Richard Dawkins wrote a couple of years ago. That book is called The God Delusion. I went through that book very carefully, ladies and gentlemen, looking for instances of affirmation or denial of the idea of God. And because I call myself Hindu, I went through that book very carefully looking for mentions of Hinduism, because quite like my questioning self at that point as a schoolboy, I was still questioning and saying, maybe he will tell me something that I don't know. And if there's something intelligent that he has to say, I should accept it. I should have the humility to accept it. I found in that book only 2 references of the word Hinduism in that entire book. It's 460 pages, if I'm not mistaken. And in all that book, which basically says that religion is bad and this, that, and the other, the only 2 mentions of Hinduism are this. One, it says in 1947, India got divided into two countries, and there was some trouble between Hindus and Muslims. That's one reference to Hinduism. The other reference to Hinduism essentially just says that among the many faiths of the world, there is Hinduism. I looked in that entire book for arguments, logical, rational, scientific arguments, to say that anything that I believe is wrong. And I then tweeted to Richard Dawkins, who's really, truly, I mean, if you've read The Selfish Gene and so on and so forth, he's truly one of the greatest scientists of our time. I wrote to him saying that I see your arguments, I see their validity, and I respect you as a scientist, but I want you to give me the answers to what I believe and their refutation. So you will come and tell me, the problem is that you believe one set of principles. I will go back to you and say, but I don't believe in one set of principles. If you ask different Hindus, they all believe different things, but there is something that holds us together. You will come and tell me, oh, but you follow practices that are not suitable 21st century. I will turn around to you and say, but what practices? Which practices do I follow which you think are unscientific? You tell me, and if I feel it's unscientific, I will give them up. I have no problems in giving them up. I'm still waiting for an answer to my tweets. And I suspect I'll be waiting for a very long time, because a lot of the new atheist arguments against religion, and they're valid arguments, I mean, I'm not here to dispute anything that anybody says. They have thought about certain subjects with great depth, and so be it. But a lot of these arguments need to be taken in context to our personal beliefs. Whatever your beliefs may be, I'm not saying your beliefs has to be Hindu. Whatever your belief is, you need to take those arguments one by one in context. What are those arguments and what do they mean to me? How do they work or don't work for me? And if they don't fit in, so to speak, in the arguments that you make for yourself about your belief structure, then the validity is questionable. And I want to quote to you, while I was reading Richard Dawkins and looking for references of Hinduism in his wonderful book, I chanced upon another man. Some of you may have heard of him. Professor Alan Lightman. Does anybody read him? Professor Alan Lightman is one of the few people, or perhaps the only person, who has ever been given a joint responsibility at MIT for teaching the humanities and the sciences. And Professor Lightman has written a whole series of books exploring the idea of faith and science and reason and so on and so forth. And he says something really interesting, which I think is quite pertinent. Alan Lightman says, to label people of faith as non-thinkers, consider the verses of the Gitanjali, which is written by Rabindranath Tagore, the first Indian poet, the first Indian Nobel laureate, who is also a poet and a writer, the Messiah, the Mosque of the Alhambra, the paintings of the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel. Should we take to task Tagore and Handel, Sultan Yusuf and Michelangelo for not thinking? Should be labeled as non-thinkers Abraham Lincoln, Mahatma Gandhi, Nelson Mandela, because of their religious beliefs, because of their faith in some things that cannot be proved. Lightman concludes that faith is not just about believing in God or negating scientific evidence, but about the willingness to give ourselves over, at times, to things that we do not fully understand. And here comes the most interesting thing. If Vivekananda was presented with this argument, he would say, no, you should not give yourself to anything that you do not understand. And one of the most interesting incidences which really turned my understanding of my own personal faith happens in the life of Vivekananda. And I think one of the most interesting points of the theological journey of Hinduism, especially in the modern era, Vivekananda began as a skeptic. He began as somebody who questioned everything. And one of the great moments of his life comes when he, as a very young man, goes to his spiritual master, a man called Ramakrishna Paramhans, this unlettered village priest, so to speak. And he had asked a lot of philosophers of that time in Calcutta, have you seen God? One persistent, annoying question. He was one of those precocious Bengali kids who continue to annoy everybody in India even today. He asked a lot of irritating questions to everybody. And Vivekananda kept on asking all these people, have you seen God? And none of them could answer his question. And the final philosopher that he asked this question looked at him and said, "You have the eyes of the yogi, my son." And Vivekananda notes that that was a really annoying answer to him. He was like, "What do you mean? I'm asking you, is there God? You're telling me I have the eyes of the yogi. Like, you're obviously daft." So he goes to this unlettered village priest, and he's very skeptical, and he writes about his skepticism, and he's like, "Why am I even going to him? I mean, this guy's not even educated. As I was taught in school, he keeps singing random songs in front of an idol all day. Like, why am I interested in him?" So he goes to this unlettered village priest, and they have some conversation, and Vivekananda, who's getting more and more irritated by the moment, turns to the old man and says, "Well, all this is very good, but have you seen God?" And the unlettered village priest tells him, "Yes, of course I've seen God." And Vivekananda says, "Can you show me?" And he says, "But of course I can show you. I see God every day, like the way I see you now." And at that moment, the monk writes that he felt as if he had been hit by something. His entire perspective to life, his own identity, everything completely transformed, because here was this unlettered man who was telling him that he has seen God and he can show him God. And that was the defining moment where everything changes for him, because he suddenly realizes that there are things that he clearly hasn't found answers to, which this unlettered man who keeps singing random songs in front of the strange idol might have answers to. And there was this monk, it's another incident that I really like. There's this monk called Ramana Maharishi, and I like to connect these two incidences because they're so interesting. So Ramana Maharishi spent most of his life in silence, essentially. He was on top of a hill, and again, I tell my younger audiences that he had the best life. He was just essentially chilling on top of a hill for most of his life, right? I mean, he was quiet, he was doing his own thing, he didn't talk to too many people. But Ramana Maharishi was this great mystic. Again, Paul Brunton, the great traveler, goes up to Ramana Maharishi, and he's a bit like Vivekananda, he's full of questions. So he has all these questions, and he's going to ask this mystic, and he's going to ask this mystic, so what do you think about the future, and what do you think about what's going to happen in Europe, what's going to happen in Asia, what is God, what is the meaning of life, and so on and so forth. So he goes in front of the master and asks all these questions, and then there is silence. And after some time, the master turns his head and looks at him, and he says, "But who's asking these questions?" And Paul Brunton says, "What do you mean? I am asking these questions. You can see me." And the master tells him, "But who are you?" And Paul Brunton writes in this wonderful book called In Search of Secret India that he suddenly felt that he didn't have any more questions left. He felt that suddenly his questions disappeared, that suddenly his questions didn't mean anything because he hadn't answered the fundamental question within him. And from that point, of course, from Vivekananda's being swept away by this unlettered village priest to the answers of Ramana Maharishi to Paul Brunton, we return back once again, as we always must in the cycle of life, to that fundamental question of Yuval Noah Harari: who are you? And I truly believe that there are only three questions worth answering in the Hindu way of looking at the world. Also, this word Hindu, right? I mean, that itself is deeply problematic, as many of you must know. It's not if you told if you told the people who wrote the Upanishads or the Vedas Hindu, they wouldn't know what you mean, right? I mean, it's a phrase that is, for the lack of a better word, a far more modern phrase. It's not a word that, that has been associated with most of Hindu history. So I think many people increasingly are beginning to use the phrase that everybody always used to use at one point, which is Sanatana-Dharma. Now, Sanatana-Dharma, of course, as many of you would know, is essentially only a rule of the universe that governs everything and everything that happens within the universe and has a cohesive logic to it. So we come back to that fundamental question, who are we? And there are only three questions I think Sanatana-Dharma compels us to answer. Who am I, what do I want, and what is my purpose? And it is my humble submission that most of us will never go beyond the first question. And human life is really fundamentally us trying to answer that fundamental question. And most of us, I don't think I will ever go beyond the first question. Vivekananda told Nivedita that if you answer all questions, then you truly see. And there is this wonderful, on the point of sight, and I wanted to open up also to take questions to continue this conversation, but I want to end on the point of sight. Sight is really important. If you truly ask me, if you met me on the street and said, "Are you religious?" I would tell you, "I don't know." If you asked me, "What faith do you belong to?" I would say, "Hindu." If you asked me, "What does the Hinduism mean to you?" I would say the idea that we must constantly strive towards sight. At that point, you would ask me, "But what on earth do you mean? You have two eyes, you're seeing every day. So what does sight mean to you?" And at that point, I would tell you that I feel, and I really feel, and this is spoken very deeply to me in my personal life, that the idea of human beings having the ability to see things for what they really are is one of the fundamental reasons why I am a Hindu. Because of that question. In the Bhagavad-Gita, there's this wonderful moment where Krishna goes to Duryodhan, and some of you may have read the Mahabharata. This is about this war between these two feuding clans, the Kauravas and the Pandavas, and Krishna, who's this god avatar. He's the sort of mediator at that point, in the point that we are picking up the story in this conversation. And he's going on behalf of the Pandavas to their cousins, the Kauravas, and saying, "Well, you can take all the kingdoms, everything, just give them 5 villages. Give them 5 villages and they'll be happy, and there will be no war, there will be no conflict. It'll all end. Just give them 5 villages." They're not even asking for their grand territories and their armies and their kingdoms. And Duryodhana is not able to give those 5 villages. Instead, he tells his people, his soldiers, to arrest and bind the avatar Krishna, at which point the Lord shows him, and he develops the ability to see suddenly, because he sees, says the Mahabharata, he sees in the body of Krishna the entire universe, and so on and so forth. And there's an echo of this incident in the battlefield, where the Bhagavad-Gita occurs, where Arjuna is asking all these questions on why should I fight? Why should I fight my cousins? Why should I fight my family? Why should I kill all these people? War is terrible, and so on and so forth. And Krishna tells Arjuna that you do not have the ability to see. And Arjuna says, "What do you mean? What do you mean I don't have the ability to see?" And he says, "I will grant you the powers to really see so that you are able to understand the universe." And at that moment, the Bhagavad-Gita says that Arjuna is able to see within the physical form of Krishna, so to speak, that it subsumed the entire universe, and so on and so forth. Now, I've often wondered whether this is somebody asked me in one of my lectures whether this is a miracle. People keep asking me about miracles all the time, right? And I keep giving them the only answer that Vivekananda gave when asked about Ramakrishna Paramahansa's miracles. There's this letter that somebody writes to Vivekananda saying, "Oh, what about the miracles of Ramakrishna Paramahansa?" And Vivekananda writes back saying, "What nonsense! As if Ramakrishna Paramahansa had no business rather than converting Gupta's medicines into wine. I mean, what ridiculous nonsense is this? He's not about miracles." So there's this miracle, and I've often wondered whether I should take this as a miracle, that how is it on the battlefield that one man is able to see the entire universe within the body of another man? What does that even mean? And it occurred to me, and my friend Vamsi Juluri, who's a professor and writes beautifully about this, also talks about this. He says there's something called the idea of darshan, that you're able to see something, right? That worship begins with, what is worship? Worship is not submission. Worship is the ability to see. And that idea of sight is directly connected to the idea of intelligence. That you are truly able to perceive the world for what it truly is. What does that really mean? If I were to look at you and truly understand you, the person, the individual, and the consciousness, so to speak, your fears and your doubts and your anxieties and your pain and your humiliations and whatever else all these years that have, and your happiness and joy and so on and so forth, that has made you, if I'm really able to see that, then I would have empathy towards you, right? Then I wouldn't behave the way we usually behave towards somebody else. Then I wouldn't push you and try to essentially kill you on the tracks of the subway system of New York, right? Because I will truly see you, right? I will see the stress and the hurt and the pain that you carry within yourself. I will have empathy. And that to me is one more reason why I still write Hindu on those forms. Because the idea of sight is such an interesting and a compelling reason for me to even consider faith. I consider faith because it tells me that I might have one day a greater ability to empathize. I would have greater kindness. And what could be a more compelling reason, ladies and gentlemen, to believe in anything, then it'll make us kinder. I submit to you that if there is one lesson I have learned, and I'm not saying you have to learn from Hinduism or Hindu thought, or for anything that you may believe in, but since I'm Hindu and we're talking about Hinduism, what I have learned from Hinduism is that it will give you the ability to conceive things that will make you kinder. What could be a greater, more powerful reason to believe? What could be a more egoless reason to believe in anything? And I consistently remain Hindu because I hold on to that hope for myself that one day I will have the ability to see, and the day I do truly see, I will be able to be more kind to you, have more compassion, see you for who you really are, not see the ego projection that you do every day and that I do every day, but look beyond the ego projection into your real self. And the day my real self sees your real self, that is the only reason we should ever contemplate God, according to me. And with that, I thank you for your time, and I want to open the stage for questions, and let's have a conversation.
Thank you very much. That was wonderful.
Thank you. Thank you very much for coming.
I'm going to see the red shoes. So I have to run along.
Yes.
So I'll bring the mic to you because we're filming and they can't hear you if you're just talking. All right.
You said about Hindu, the word Hindu.
Yeah.
The Hindu is a western form of Sindhu.
Yeah, of course.
Hindu is the Indus River.
Right.
So those people who were in that,
Yes, of course. Yeah.
whatever they observed,
Yes.
became the Hindu.
I agree. So, and that's the point. But yes, but I'm the
But any faith
correct.
can be Hindu.
I'm not sure many other faiths would really.
Go to church and still say that I am Hindu.
True, but I'm not sure the people who. No, sure. But I'm not sure the people who would go to church and then say they're Hindus. I mean, I guess then we're in like tricky territory there. But sure, I mean, that's an opinion. It's an opinion I feel a lot of people would be uncomfortable with, so I don't want to.
Can you please talk a little bit about Shaktipat and as far as what happens when a person's Kundalini is already starting to flow?
Yes.
And then they receive Shaktipat.
Yes.
What exactly would be happening from there? Thank you.
This is a very interesting question. By the way, this is a question that was asked to Vivekananda also, because as you know, his master, Ramakrishna Paramhans, was a worshipper of Kali, right? So what happens when our Kundalini, so to speak, is awakened? And then where does it go? What happens to us? And so on and so forth. Well, the only answer he gave is the answer I present to you, is that there is only one place to go, so to speak, which is a greater awareness of who you are. And this is the answer he gave to Sister Nivedita also, that the idea of the feminine power of the universe, so to speak, the idea of Shakti and so on and so forth, awakens within you this sense of revelation. And where does the revelation take you? It takes you to a deeper understanding of your innate self. Where is that innate self? Again, then we go back to that point of everything is the Brahman and so on and so forth, right? So his point was, and this is an interesting point I think worth mentioning, that the conclusion, the final conclusion, and in fact his master even said that, right, in Joto Mot Toto Pot, as many as there are ways, there are paths to God. That you could take any path, and the Vedantists would take the Vedantist path, the non-Vedantists would take another path, and somebody else will take another path, and Shankara would not agree with Ramanuja, and this and that and the other. Now you could take whatever paths you want to take, but the concluding point that you will reach is the same. That's the Hindu argument. That you could take, therefore Hinduism, so Professor Vishwa Aduluri talked about pluralism. And I think a lot of people don't understand. So why are Hindus okay with pluralism? Like why are most Hindus not concerned that, oh well, this shape is mine and that shape is yours, but then we are colliding and so on and so forth? Why? Why is it that in this beautiful yoga center, if you go into that room, there is the dancing Shiva, if you come out, there is the pot-bellied Ganesha, and so on and so forth? Why isn't there a collision immediately saying, oh, but I want to follow this and you want to follow this? Because the final point that you reach, because there is only one place to go to, if you know what I mean, right? And there was this great monk of the Ramakrishna Mission who used to joke that to people who pestered him about this, saying, oh, but there's a different path and I feel something else. He said, the only other people who got this were the Romans, because they also said all roads lead to Rome, right? So they were the only people who got it. But that's of course a joke, but yeah, there's nowhere to go. Like,
the only thing that concerns me is that
yeah.
from, and I can show you the book later if you're interested,
Yeah.
the after effects of that specific shock
Yes.
would be having these automatic Kriya movements.
Yes.
And I'm still, even after reading the book,
Yes.
not exactly sure what that would entail.
Unless I go through that process, I don't have an answer. In fact, many people would tell you that what it would entail could differ from person to person, right? It might have different impact on different people. Because, look, I mean, again, we have to, I'm always very skeptical, and I'm always shy of describing anything in esoteric terms. Because I don't think anything, I mean, things may be esoteric genuinely, but I think in most things, at least in Hinduism, all seemingly esoteric things also have a deep underlying rational and scientific structure. And my friend Neha often gets very angry with people about this, when they make the wrong arguments about this. So I know she would smile about this. But so I don't like to describe things in esoteric terms. Fundamentally, whether you say Shaktipat, whether you say Vivekananda's Raja Yoga, whether you say something else, whatever, right? Different people would say different things. What does it really mean? And why are you doing it? You're doing it for a greater understanding, some would tell you, about the universe. But what is the universe? You're doing it for the greater understanding of yourself, right? Now, what impact it would have in your social self, so to speak, in external body, might be different from you and me. Because at the end of the day, at least in a physical self, we are different, right? So what impact it might have momentarily on you and me might differ. So it would be impossible for me to give you an absolute answer on what it might be. I would have to go through exactly the same processes, and this is something that they teach in Tantra also, for instance, that in Tantric procedures, it depends on who the devotee is, who is going through that process. Right? Sure, at one point it all leads to the same thing, but the journey is different. That's why Hinduism, by the way, doesn't have a problem with individualism. See, a lot of people don't understand this. They think, oh, this collective masses. I actually really think, and that Hinduism is particularly interesting because it has no problem with you being an individual. Right? You can be an individual, you can have your own individual sense of self and all sorts of things, as long as you're also tapped into a greater consciousness. Because you can then manifest that, you say, oh, what is your name? Lev. So you can say, well, I am Lev, and, I want to have long hair, and I want to wear only black, or whatever. Right? Which is fine. Right? And I can be Hindu and say, well, I clearly don't want to be as fit as Lev, and I can be whatever, and I want to eat far more sweets than Lev, and so on and so forth. As long as Lev and Hindol tapped into a greater idea that beyond Lev being supremely fit and Hindol being fat and so on and so forth, there is a higher truth. Right? And I think it's easy to forget that. Because you see, esoteric things are cool, right? And we are all looking for all these markers of individualism. So somebody will say, even I hear in Delhi, in India also, people say, well, I am into Hatha Yoga in this like obscure little sect which does this. So therefore I'm cooler than you. You're just like an ordinary yoga, whatever, doing it on your mat at home. However, I only go to the Himalayas and do this. Sure, which is wonderful. And human beings want that sense of identity. But that identity just has to be tapped into something deeper, which is common between you, me, her, him, her, all of that, right? That's my only point. That was a very long answer. I'm Bengali, I talk too much anyway.
Great answer.
Thank you.
Could you actually go back to like your idea of all roads leading to Rome?
Yes.
The subtitle of your book.
Yes.
What is the subtitle?
Understanding a Peaceful Path in a Violent World. But this is the American subtitle, by the way. The Indian subtitle was different.
I know. So
Yeah.
I have a different version.
Yeah.
But let's go back and talk about it.
Yes.
Like this idea
Yes.
of what is what the oneness of being, because
Yes.
maybe that response over there was somebody saying it's the oneness of being. This is
Yeah.
if I go to church or if I go to
Yeah.
the college, is it the same thing?
Yeah.
And are we all looking for the same thing?
Yeah.
And why are we in a time
Yes.
now where actually spirituality
Yes.
is so divisive?
Yes.
You have a leader of the free country saying,
Yes.
well, shooting that happened in
Yeah.
Las Vegas,
Yeah.
we don't mention it.
Yeah.
A car
Yeah.
that runs over
People
pedestrians in New York City, all of a sudden we're calling it
don't.
something
Yeah.
that's evil.
Yes.
And the division
Yeah.
between that,
Yeah.
what can
Yeah.
we do about that?
Yeah. So I think
These are
fundamental things. Yeah. They are very fundamental things. Let's take a historical perspective first, right? Let's take what we definitely know. We definitely know, for instance, that, let's give an example of a parallel faith, just as an example, right? We know definitely, for instance, that in the history of Islam, there was that wonderful moment where Al-Halaj, the great mystic, said, Anal Haq, which means I am God. Now, what happened to Al-Halaj? He was immediately beheaded, right? Now, what I'm trying to get at is, I think the mystics of every faith often tap into a higher rationale for belief. If you look at Thomas Merton, for instance, right? The great Benedictine monk Thomas Merton, if you read his books, right? You find echoes of that mysticism, right? The mystics often tap into certain, and you can read them and say, well, but I don't agree with this part and that part and so on and so forth. But there are echoes. And I want to come with that to another point also. But there are echoes. Let's finish this point. But what happens is, those echoes are easily forgotten. In a in a system that does not allow for pluralism, those echoes of mysticism are often forgotten. And I think it's very important to keep alive those echoes of mysticism in whatever you believe, not just the main faiths, not just Hinduism, Islam, Christianity, whatever, right? I mean, actually, it's a wonderful moment to be talking about this, and many of you would know this. We are just days have gone by. I mean, we're just a few days after the 500th anniversary of Reformation, right? And people often forget what happened during Christian Reformation, why Christian Reformation happened, what were the Lutherites tapping into or wanting to tap into, what they believe was the final point of Christ, right? Beyond all the paraphernalia of the church, they wanted to tap into the real soul of Christ, so to speak, right? And Christian Reformation, has its own history and so on and so forth. And the same is with in many faiths, you will see this, that the mystics often get a glimpse of a truth that may not always find voice because of surrounding circumstances, let's say. But that they get a glimpse of the truth is definitely true. What they do from that moment is then we are into the space of how faiths develop, their histories, politics, all of that. And I don't want to go into all that because then we are in different territory. But there is definitely this point about all faiths lead. And by faith there, remember, one great mistake that people make, by faith there, we are not actually talking about organized religion. We are talking about the individual self of faith. And what is that? That every human being, at some point or the other feels that there is a search within them for a greater truth. Because one day you will wake up and say, well, sure, I mean, I have that brownstone in Manhattan, and I also have that ranch and blah, blah. In India, you will say, I have that home in Jorbag and blah, blah. But what does all of this mean? The moment you begin to ask, what does it mean, begins your journey. That's the beginning point of self-reflection, right? What does all of this mean? Why should I even do all this? I'm going to die in like a few years. So then what does all this mean? Why should I accumulate all of this? Now that moment is a very wonderful and precious moment. And when we say all faiths lead to the same point, what we are saying is from that point where you ask, what does it all mean, to the point where you find the meaning, that point, these 2 points are correlated. Here we are not saying every organized religion is the same or not the same. This is a fundamental mistake people make. People say, oh, well, then this means all organized religion. No, organized religion is something that the world has brought about, so to speak. We are talking about a far more molecular level. We are talking about an individual search for meaning. An individual search for meaning will always go to the same answer, no matter who that individual is. This is not to say every organized religion has the same belief. This is a very fundamental mistake, and I think a lot of the problem begins from there, right? So as individuals, whatever may be your desire for meaning, you will, if you truly search, you will find a glimpse of that. Now, what you do with that glimpse, are you able to cultivate it? We don't have an answer. Look, I mean, we know, for instance, you will know this, that all studies of neuroscience is showing that Buddhist monks, for instance, who go through many, many hundreds of hours of meditation, their mind begins to function in a different way. And, all the Indian yogis would completely understand this. So I want to make another point here. A lot of debate happens on, people say, oh, in Hinduism, did the Vedas have nuclear science and flying chariots and aeroplanes and stuff? That's a wrong way of putting it. I mean, this is just, illiteracy is rife, right? I mean, so people say all sorts of strange things. The point is, if you look at also about quantum physics, right? I mean, there's a lot of debate about that. Oh, so does that mean there was quantum physics somebody asked me in one lecture, does that mean, and he mentioned some equation also in quantum physics, does that mean this equation was in the Upanishads? No, that's not the point. The point is, if you were to today be a serious student of the Upanishadic texts over a long period of time, and then you were to go and study quantum mechanics, quantum physics, what have you, you would find many echoes of ideas. I think the best way of putting it, as one scientist put to me, is that essentially what the seers understood instinctively, they got a glimpse of, is being proved to us by modern science in many ways. This is not to say that this equation was in that book. You see, this is the problem with materialism, right? You say, unless this equation was in that book, it must be false. That's not the point. There are echoes of understanding of certain conceptual notions, for the lack of a better phrase, which have echoes between certain books of Upanishadic knowledge and certain scientific truths that we know today. That does not in any shape or form mean that this nuclear rocket was mentioned in that book. I mean, this is a fundamental mistake. So, I just wanted to clarify that because all sorts of random things keep getting said. And this understanding is getting deeper and deeper around the world. I mean, there are, like I said, Stanford now has this wonderful center of studying consciousness. We don't, by the way, yet know what is consciousness. We are still grappling with that idea, what is consciousness, right? And people who study physics, I mean, physicists will tell you, all physicists will tell you they don't like the word God particle. It's just something that somebody invented and they keep saying and so on and so forth. A good example of what I'm trying to say is the example I gave to you. You know, the Ananda Kumaraswamy, the great Indian scholar, actually Sri Lankan scholar, but Indic scholar is what I was trying to say, spoke about the dancing Shiva at CERN. CERN is the European Center for Atomic Research. And the dancing Shiva that stands at CERN, he spoke about it as this wonderful idea of the universe being, in literally physical terms, created, maintained, and destroyed in an endless cycle. Now, this idea, most physicists will tell you, is an idea of physics. That energy in the universe is constantly manifesting itself in different ways, right? Now, if somebody comes and say, but where is Shiva in this physics book? Or did Shiva say these physics book theorems, did he mention it? Then, I mean, I just think it's stupidity. Obviously that's not true. But there are many parallels, which are interesting parallels, but they are not to be considered miracles. I mean, I'm very wary of this idea of miracles. They're not to be considered these great, grand miracles which are here and there and so on and so forth. There are interesting ideas that have parallels in different subjects. Yes? What is religion and how does it interact with faith? Yeah, and what is religion and how does it interact with faith? No, I would say religion is irrelevant. To me, at least. I mean, I'm not a big, I don't feel religion is relevant. Religion is when you convert your personal faith into, at its best, there are two ways of looking at religion according to me. Let's begin with faith. Faith is your individual belief. Faith is any individual, good faith, there could be bad faith also. Good faith is any individual belief that takes you to a higher, better process, way of living. Good faith is anything that makes you a better, more empathetic human being. Good faith at a very simple level is anything that makes you kinder is good faith. Does it make you a better human being or not? Because there's no point saying I'm hugely devoted and so on and so forth, but I mean, I run over dogs with my SUV and I, like steal whatever, like from my neighbor and so on and so forth, right? There's no point in that. So good faith is anything that takes you to a higher, better condition of living. What is religion? The organized form of that faith is religion. At its best, religion can be truly a community that works for the betterment of its people, that makes people more social, that helps people understand each other, take care of each other, help each other in need, and so on and so forth. At its worst, religion can be exclusionary and say, we are the best, you guys are the worst, and it's you versus us, and so on and so forth. Right? So there are different ways of looking at it. It's what you do with it. Yes, go ahead.
Wonderful talk, Hindota. And my question, there are two parts to my question.
Yes.
Two parts of your
Yeah.
The first part is you spoke about being accepting and not being dogmatic.
Yes.
But the complication comes when the other person or a set of people are insanely dogmatic. So how do you accept that dogma or not let it get over you? At the same time, how do you push for a more accepting society with like fighting dogma without fighting the dogmatist itself?
Yeah.
That's my first question. My second
Yeah.
question is more on the lines of you spoke about reasoning and scientific reasoning and how you constantly reevaluate, and you said that the minute you find something's off, you
Yeah.
fill religion in the form.
Yeah.
So my question is, how often do we reevaluate? Because
All the time.
but how do you not get into a state of vikarma that like how conviction and reevaluation, how can both of these coexist? That's my basic question.
Well, let's take the second question first, right? I would argue that any individual who does not constantly question themselves, and by themselves I use with great care, because remember, selves also mean all your beliefs and your dogmas and your prejudices and blah, blah, right? If you don't consistently question these things, then you are doing more self-harm than anything else. You should constantly question it. I would argue your faith is true only if it constantly is able to take the brunt of questioning. Please understand, there is an example after example. Vivekananda questioned everything all the time until his dying death. You know, on his death, I like to say that Vivekananda understood also that truly you need one thing to be cool, right? What is that one thing? Which many rock stars also realized. That's why Vivekananda was a rock star. He realized that you have to die young. Because no rock star can remain cool if they die very old. So you die young, you remain immortal and cool. But anyway, that's a joke about Vivekananda. But you'll be, and here's the interesting thing. I crack these jokes all the time with the monks of the Ramakrishna Mission. And it's interesting to me how I mean, almost every time they just laugh. They laugh at me. We have forgotten that belief, true faith, gives you humor. We keep saying Sat Chit Anandam, one day we will find the ultimate happiness, but today we will be really miserable and mean to everybody else. How does that work? We are supposedly going towards Sat Chit Anandam, but today I will be miserable and I will be hateful and I will steal from you and hurt you and insult you and so on and so forth. That makes no sense. So I have met, all the greatest monks I have met have a sense of humor. Not just about themselves, but also about God. They genuinely have a sense of humor. They're able to laugh. Remember, Ramakrishna Paramahansa used to fight with the goddess Kali and say, oh, how dare you not give me this? Today I'm really angry. I will not do this. Now, you can say, oh, this is crazy. Yes, maybe it was crazy. But that's the personal relationship. You know, Mirabai had the same relationship with Krishna. Her Krishna, right? Where she could fight with Krishna and tell him this and tell him that, and because it was so intricately personal. And I feel the danger begins when religion or faith begins to lose its sense of lightness and humor. Where you take that sense of being alive from the faith and say, well, I believe this, if you don't believe this, I will kill you. That's insanity. I mean, we should really laugh a little more about faith, because clearly God is laughing at us. Wherever God may be or not may be, that divine, whatever you want to call it, energy, figure, whatever it is laughing at us. I mean, Osho used to say, you know, if you read Osho's book on Krishna, he makes this point all the time, that the future belongs to Krishna. Well, I mean, Krishna, the idea of Krishna. I don't want anybody to go away from here saying, but then you said Krishna, therefore now everything else. No. No, these are dangerous things. So he said, because Krishna is so light-hearted, right? Because at the end of the day, if kindness, that's why Buddhist monks are always smiling. Have you noticed? The Dalai Lama is always smiling. I mean, God knows the Dalai Lama has enough reason to be really grumpy and irritated, right? I mean, God knows if there's one person who should be grumpy, it is His Holiness the Dalai Lama. Right? But he isn't. He's full of laughter and joy all the time. I have seen monks of the Ramakrishna Mission who are really ill, literally on their deathbed. You go meet them, they'll tell you a joke. And these are really elderly men who are literally on their deathbed. We have forgotten, we have taken the sense of being alive away from faith. You know, we've squeezed out the sense of being alive. We've made faith a dead weight around our neck, which traps us into this dogma and like says you can't question anything, and then it's a trap. At the end of the day, and here's my other point. Here's where, in Hinduism at least, we keep saying, what is the final point? Vivekananda also said, the final point is never God. Final point is mukti, liberation, right? We keep saying mukti is the final point, but we're trapped today. What about that? So happiness is the final point, liberation is the final point, but how am I getting there? By being miserable to everybody, and by being trapped in these structures and constructs which I cannot break free. How is that even logical? Think about it. right? That makes no sense. So I believe in faith that truly celebrates. If you will say, come to me and say, I'm a Hindu too, I would tell you, let's go and have a great meal together. Right? We are alive. What can be more wonderful that we are alive today? We are here, we are alive. That is the true lesson of Hinduism. At this moment, I am alive. I might fail in my midterms at Columbia University, but today at this point, I am alive. I am not understanding the accounts that I am being taught, but today I am alive. I may not be able to draw a supply cycle which will intersect neatly with the demand cycle, but I am alive today. I am happy about it. That's religion, that's faith. To me, that is faith. Being happy. Yes. Should we give somebody else? Yes, sir. Go ahead.
I have one question because as I sit somewhere going forward,
Yeah.
the Pew Research or some other researchers, I didn't remember exactly. What they are predicting is more people are going to be faithless or atheists or religionless, and it could be because I would say all religions majority of the religions have at least few good points.
Yeah.
But what people are doing is that is unable to communicate or move forward with that message, and whatever that good message there is there, some people are hijacking it. Whether it is they say that this particular religion or that particular religion, they are hijacking it, turning it into there's self-motive goals. Like I want to achieve this goal, I can hijack religion or faith or any good thing that is followed by many people. And due to this, can we go to faithless or religionless going forward as a society? Whole world I'm talking.
See, let me give you the answer, which we were just discussing the other day at Columbia University. So say if you came to Swami Vivekananda and told him, there is no God. Okay? You came to him and said, there is no God. He would say, okay, there's no problem. Reverse. You went to him and said, I am 100% certain there is God. He would say, okay, there is no problem. The answer is that whether there is God or not, there is certainly you, right? You cannot deny that you are there. You can deny that God is there, God is not there, we don't know. You are there, right? Right? That's enough. Why are we concerned whether in the future there will be no faiths, people will be faithless, people will not be faithless, there will not be religion, there will be religion? It's immaterial as far as I'm concerned. I really feel, and even as far as Hinduism is concerned, it's immaterial. Yeah, maybe in the future there will be no religion. I don't know. Maybe we will all reach Satchidanandam and we will all be in this ocean of bliss. Wonderful. Right? I mean, that's fantastic. Why do we, even this idea that, in the future, will there be religion? I don't know. And I am only concerned about that because if I feel that in some way my ego is attached to this idea of religion which will survive in the future and therefore I will do this or that, I mean, it's immaterial. That does not mean that tomorrow if somebody comes and attacks me, I will not give a response. Ramakrishna Paramahansa said this wonderful story about this monk who was going by in a field, and he saw a snake, and the snake, lifted its fangs to attack him. And the monk said, this is terrible to the snake. How can you behave like this? You're God's creature and you're attacking people, hurting them. Stop doing this. This is horrible. The snake was suitably chastised and the monk went away. 10 days later, the monk was passing by again, suddenly turned and saw a completely battered snake, almost dead, and said, what happened? What happened to you? How did this happen to you? And the snake said, well, you told me not to, raise my fangs. So they attacked me and they beat me up and I'm almost dead. So the monk turned to the snake and said, I told you not to bite. I did not tell you not to raise your fang. And I leave that thought with you. There is a difference between knowing how to defend yourself and attacking people. There is a vast difference. It is important. It's like asking you the question, I don't know whether, let's look at it from a simple example. If you ask me, will the idea and notion of family last the next 50 years? I don't know. Today, if somebody comes to attack my mother, will I protect her or not? I will, right? That has nothing to do with whether the institution of family will last another 100 years or not. I don't know whether the institution of family will last another 100 years or not. I do know though, today if somebody comes to attack my mother, I will defend her. That much I know. Now, in the future, whether there is family, no family, family is not called family, called something else, I mean, sure. I hope you understand what I'm trying to get at. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, well, first of all, thank you for writing the book. I think it's great that you're opening up all these questions because it's so needed and we need to delve deeper into ourselves. That being said, I feel like we're very distracted in the West, and we've got this concept of spiritual sort of tourism, where we'll take a little bit of Buddhism,
Yeah.
we'll take a little bit of Hinduism,
Yeah.
take a little bit of Christian, and people are just lost. Can you speak to, like, how you feel about devotion? Because I feel
Yeah.
like sometimes you were talking about
Yeah.
knowing yourself, and
Yeah.
can you speak a little bit to that?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this came up the other day. I was talking to a bunch of people in Colombia, and this point of devotion, and people taking exactly what you said, a bit of this and a bit of that, and funnily enough, it came up in the conversation when I had just said that Hinduism is an open source faith, it's all about apps and so on and so forth. And then somebody turned to me and said, but all this is happening. So then I realized that actually, literally, people are going to only apps. That's not what I mean. I mean, sometimes this is also misunderstood. I don't literally mean you download 5 apps on your phone, right? Look, I think the problem begins, let's take the problem at the most fundamental level and then let's go up, right, together. At the most fundamental level, if you talk about devotion, I would argue that the first thing or place of devotion is to yourself. If you're not kind to yourself, you will not be kind to me. It's impossible. I cannot love somebody else's mother first. It is not possible. I have to love my mother first. And even before I love my mother, I have to love myself first. It's only then I can truly love whoever I want to love, right? Obviously, people are taking a bit of this and bit of that, and obviously devotion doesn't come easily because there is no devotion to the self, right? And it's not just in the West, it's everywhere. Because you have no kindness, you display no kindness to yourself. I mean, you only have to go on the subway to Wall Street at 9 o'clock tomorrow morning to realize that not too many people are showing too much kindness to themselves. And if you don't show your kindness to yourself, if you feel every marker of your self-worth is an external marker, why is Hindol important? Because he earns so much money. Why is Neha important? Because this is her position in her company. Why is Austin important? Because he's worth X $1,000 million, whatever. I'm just saying each marker, right, is an external marker, including what we today call body shaming. It's an external marker. Why are you important? Because you look in this particular way. Where is the kindness to yourself in all of that? Right? If I wake up every morning thinking that my self-worth is entirely diverted from an external point, I'm showing no kindness to myself. Obviously, there will be no devotion. And before you're devoted to any spiritual practice, surely you should be devoted to yourself first. But I don't see any devotion to ourselves. So, and that's the first point, right? That's the most fundamental. Now let's go a little higher up and, let's tackle some of the other issues that you mentioned. People take a bit of this, a bit of that, a bit of this, right? Why? Because they think even faith or belief is something to be acquired, right? So it's fall. You will buy 3 jackets from Uniqlo, 1 jacket from, I don't know, like Marc Jacobs. You will service your Ferrari, and you will download the Headspace app, right? Obviously, there's no devotion. Why do you want to go to this particular center there? Oh, because your boss goes there. So even in something as intrinsic as faith, you're tick marking a bunch of boxes that will make you cooler, or that will help you, attain certain material goals. So therefore you say, okay, I like the Dalai Lama, so I think it's politically correct to like the Dalai Lama, and therefore I will, follow this meditation system, so I can write on Facebook that I follow this meditation system. Okay, then in Hinduism, I think India's economy is doing well. I should connect with India because I'm managing a fund which has $1 billion invested in India. So let's show some interest in India. Okay, I will say my yoga center in Kerala does this also on Facebook. So everybody will see that, okay, I'm interested in India, so therefore I'm clearly following India. I have to invest in China, so now I have to show China. How do I do it? Okay, I will read a few quotes of Confucius, I'll put them on Facebook. Obviously, right? I mean, that's a fundamental problem. It's not coming from within you. What do you need? You don't need an ism. You need peace. You need liberation. You need happiness. But if you turn that need into an ism, of course there will be a problem. Because then you will be like, okay, today in America, what is politically correct to like? So I will like. If I confess to liking this, people will think I'm right-wing, left-wing, I don't know. Okay, no, then I shouldn't mention this. That's the wrong way. So obviously there is no devotion. I mean, imagine if Ramakrishna Paramahans used to, Satan thought, what would be politically correct for me to like in Calcutta at that time? He would have joined the Arya Samaj. I just want to put it out there. Definitely joined the Arya Samaj. If that would have been the cool thing to do in Calcutta at that time. Instead, he was running around and worshipping and crying before some idol. It wasn't very cool, but that's devotion that came from within, right? So, I mean, I think, and you say the West, and I feel the same thing is in my country too, in many places, but that we've just forget tapping into a higher consciousness. We are not even tapped into ourselves, right? And before tapping into ourselves, we want to attain higher consciousness. I mean, that day also in the lecture, somebody was asking the monk, oh, but how do we do it? And he was like, well, I mean, you need to contemplate. No. How do we do it? Like it's a magic formula which has to be thrown at you, which you will quickly pay for, and then, you will take that formula, you'll pop it like a kind bar into your mouth, like going to work in the morning, and lo behold, you'll get energy for the day. I mean, that doesn't work. I would have become thin if it worked, But, yes, sir.
Hi. So, thanks. It was a really wonderful talk. So, your book is Being Hindu. Okay, so the word Hindu is often understood in terms
Yeah.
of faith and religion.
Yeah.
And your talk is mostly about the faith.
Yeah.
Spiritual.
Yeah.
I want to talk about that religion aspect.
Sure.
You know that in India, Hindu is largely celebrated as religion as well.
Yeah.
Right? And that's how many people know it.
Sure.
Do you think that that religion aspect has helped Hinduism to contain and preserve it in the present format? Or, for example, you know that Hindu society has suffered so many attacks in last so many centuries, right? Do you think that if the people would have not that sense of religion in them, they don't have the sense of identity of being Hindu, they would be able to protect it, right? Because there was a continuous resistance just because there was someone external who was trying to change their way of practicing it, the ritual, how they eat, how they dress. So that was the main religion.
Yeah.
Because it is the
Yeah.
it should be there.
Right. It's a very interesting question, and people often give me grief about this also, so I'm very glad to clarify this. Please understand what I'm saying. I'm not suggesting that in a community sense of the word communal, a society's belief structure did not help them protect whatever was there. I am making a deeper argument. I'm saying before you notice that superstructure, which is you think as a defensive wall, it could be held together because of a deeper inner sense of preservation and understanding, which was so deep. Otherwise, you tell me, in many societies which have been attacked, within 15 years, 20 years, 30 years, everything has been transformed. This is the story of large swaths of, countries, right? Why is it that it didn't happen in India? Because what you see as the defensive layer, I am saying even before you see that those defenses or those walls held for all those years because it was tapped into an inner true faith self. If it was not deep within, it's like saying the tree had such deep roots that it could withstand the storm. You are only seeing the girth of the tree above the ground. I'm saying you should spend time to see how deep the roots went. That's why the tree did not fall. It is not because of the girth of the tree that the tree did not fall before the storm. It is because the roots went really deep down. That's why the tree did not fall. And we need to focus a little more on understanding what those roots are, why they went down so deep, and why they held on. Because if those roots were absent, no matter how fat and thick the girth of the tree, it would have fallen. That's my argument.
So you briefly touched upon this.
Yeah.
And I think like most of the questions were also circling around it, but nobody actually went to the...
But of course you will.
Of course I will. No, my question is slightly different. Like as she said about the Western society.
Yeah.
And we also see in India, as you mentioned,
Yeah.
like you see the terms like I'm a cultural Hindu.
Yeah.
I'm a spiritual Hindu.
Yeah.
Just being Hindu.
SBNR.
Because, yeah, and then you keep adding qualifiers.
What was it? SBNR? Spiritual but not religious. Yeah.
So you keep adding the qualifiers because just saying I am Hindu somehow
Doesn't help.
Yeah.
Yes.
And then there are other issues, like similar manifestations
Yeah.
of it is like you try to hide the fact that you do idol worship.
Yeah.
Because you think your peers will find
Yeah.
it uncool.
Yeah.
So similar things like you hide the bindi and you change your
Yeah.
attire and blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
So I guess like the question is, what, like, and there is clearly a struggle going on there, right? Like there's not,
Yeah.
it's not just shame, there is peer pressure obviously, then there is the derision that they perceive from the society coming
Yeah.
to them. So there is a struggle going on there. So what do you say to those people who are, there is no lack of faith, otherwise they would just stop doing what
Well, look, I mean, one of the things that I've heard again and again is, I mean, a lot of people, at least to begin with, were astonished that I wrote a book called Being Hindu, right? I mean, that itself was supposedly astonishing to a lot of people. I mean, I just feel that if there are people who find these difficulties and have this peer pressure and shame, there should be enough number of us who boldly go out there and state whatever it is that we believe in, right? See, the only way, my point is just this, the only way you will be able to counter any void is by filling it. People think instead of filling the void, can we shout around the void and we will fill it? No. We will actually have to fill the void, right? So if there are books missing, let's write those books. If there are movies to be made, let's make those movies. If there are papers to be written, let's make those write those papers. If there are departments to be launched, let's launch those departments. If there are talks to be given, let's give those talks. But people feel instead of the real work, somehow, colliding on social media will solve all the problems. It is, I mean, my humble submission is that it might solve some problems, but it will never fill the void. So we need to fill it. So if you feel that there are voids, let's fill it, which you are. I mean, you're doing it your own way. You've organized this and so on and so forth. Somebody else will do it in some other way. I'm doing it by writing this book. Harikiran Vadlamani, who started the IBC, is doing it by helping a bunch of people like me get together. Austin is doing it by organizing this wonderful thing in his home, which is the center he runs. Different people will actually have to do things. It's in the doing. Karma yoga is the only answer. Quarreling yoga only takes us so far. Not that quarreling yoga is not important. I mean, you must quarrel, but yes.
I'm very curious about the planets that people would go and supposedly take very, very long or very short, I guess, depending on the karma, vacations on before they would reincarnate. So the locusts. And one thing that I don't know if it has a connection with or not is dimethyltryptamine, DMT, and the experiences.
I don't even know what that DMT is.
Okay, so DMT, the easiest way to explain it, it's a psychedelic chemical that gets produced in your own body. The lungs produce it, the pineal gland
Right.
produces it as it was found in rats.
Right.
And it's also found in a variety of different plants
Right.
that shamans in South America turn into ayahuasca, which is the psychedelic brew that people go on on this whole journey. They go on there for several weeks before they even drink the stuff. And then when they finally drink it, they go in this very, very deep psychedelic realm where different things from the past are presented to them, different entities are being met with. And again, I have no idea if this is just happening in the brain or if they are actually going to other worlds.
I mean, I should have clearly have got some of this when I was in college. I missed it. I mean, I shall forever regret this moment that you told me about, that I didn't have this in college. I mean, truly missed something.
They also call it the businessman's high, because when you take it as a DMT, and I've never actually done DMT, but when you take it as DMT...
It's a great business idea there. I should suggest it in Columbia Business School. You know, you could have DMT parlors in near Wall Street. You know, you make your trade, you come down, you put some DMT in your blood, and you're like, okay.
Very similar to mushrooms as well, as far as the psychedelic.
Yeah.
Psychedelic.
Sure.
But basically, the point is that when people go into these realms,
Yeah.
they describe it as being realer than reality. And what I'm really, really curious about is here in this physical world, we have all of these, like if you go in with a microscope,
Yeah.
all these little imperfections, all
Yeah.
these germs and whatever. I'm really curious about if it's been written somewhere, if not, fine, about the locus and what exactly they're supposed to look like as far as the actual structure of it, what the pixels are made of. There are, you know what I mean? Like,
So I have to humbly submit that I really don't know much about this, and I don't think, I have not read anything that describes anything like this. But I would also like to humbly submit to you that all the great seers of Hinduism, whether it's Adi Shankaracharya, who walked across India and preached and so on and so forth, right up to Vivekananda and all of these people, there is no evidence that they did anything under the influence of any psychedelic substances. So, how should I put it? As of now, lacking evidence of psychedelic substances being able to show you the truth, I do believe my faith rests on non-psychedelic, platform.
Because as I was reading this book, you make fun of the fascination in the West with the
Yeah.
aura, the naked,
Yeah.
covered in ash.
Yes.
And so Patanjali, in the Yoga Sutras, he does speak in chapter 4 about psychedelics and the cities that you can gain from yoga, that you these mystical powers. But at the end of it, he says, don't mess with them. Because
Yeah.
they're just going to trap you. And so this is an interesting thing.
I mean, it's the same reason. I haven't read this, but this is the same reason that Vivekananda warned about miracles.
Right.
He was so suspicious about miracles because they just felt that, and maybe Patanjali felt the same thing, that basically this is a lower form of exploration, so to speak.
Well, it's low tantra.
Yeah. So, I mean, the urge is always to go beyond things like this. This could be interesting at a level, but to go beyond and search for something much deeper, stronger, and so on and so
And
forth.
the problem with all of this kind of outside mysticism, even in the
Yeah.
Agora community,
Yeah.
is that you end up thinking that the crematorium and being in the crematorium is enlightenment.
That's a very good point.
The tantra tradition, the ritual of the tantra, but you think that now you become enlightened.
Yeah.
There's no fear of that tantra, but you don't go past it. So it could be a trap. That's why it's the razor's edge. It's the dangerous edge. It's the edge that could take the other path which you were longer, the path of the puja, but that razor's edge can be lightning fast or it could kill you.
But all rituals have the same problem. If you read Vivekananda again, like there's this bit where he's talking about, that Hinduism, and he's angry and he's saying, today we are not even Tantrists or Vedantists or Puranics, we have become don't-touchists. Our entire point is being don't touch this in the kitchen and don't touch that in the kitchen, right? So what is he saying? He's not saying that, right, so he's not saying that every ritual is to be thrown away. He's saying if you get trapped only at the ritual level, then you have really not gone beyond. The ritual is supposed to, as he's saying, take you to a particular point, but the ritual cannot be the end in itself. No ritual has a problem as long as through or via that ritual you are getting somewhere. But if the ritual itself, if being in the crematorium itself is an end goal, then that's a problem.
Would the locus also be considered in a certain way traps as well, since you're there for some time, and that's what I'm really curious about as far as the locus go, whether that's also like a little wonderland vacation.
It could be. I mean, I will, I shall definitely try to procure some of this and come back here and tell you whether it seemed like a trap to me. Yes, Aftansji, go on.
Yes,
Yeah. Yes. Yes.
And we also have our aspirations more material. We make money.
Yeah.
We want to do something.
Sure.
So how does this relate to Hinduism? These two aspects.
But I mean, Hinduism is very clear that all aspects, are equally valid. I mean, that's why we used to have this entire point about that, you spend brahmacharya and then you have family life and then you, lead a family life and make money and whatever. And at the end, you forsake everything and you go on to your search for enlightenment. That's why this process was there, right? So sure, I mean, if you want to make money, you make money. But look, at the end of the day, the self-harm is only to you. So if you feel making money is the only goal of your life, then you will lead that sort of a life. See, the great thing about Hinduism is that it's very empowering. You want to do this, you do it. But the consequences of that is this, right? You cannot say, I want to lead a life only driven by searching for money, and then why haven't I found this? You won't. So you can do what you feel like, but the consequences are clear, very clear. That's why they say the wheel of karma always moves. You can do what you want, but the wheel of karma will move and give you what that begets. You can't escape that, right? So, I mean, it's the same thing that Krishna tells Duryodhan, right? That, in my final point also, I offered you only 5 villages. And then remember, I mean, people forget this. I mean, if you read Dinkar's Rashmi Rathi, the great Hindi poem, he talks about this, that at the end, what is Krishna saying after showing Arjun that, are you trying to bind me? Like, what's wrong with you? What is he saying? He says, any generosity has been wasted upon you, Duryodhan. You have not been able to hear the voice of reason. It was my duty to offer you the voice of reason, but you have rejected the voice of reason. Therefore, the consequences is, and what does he say? It's a war like there has never been a war before. ऐसा रन होगा कि जैसा रन ना हुआ. As a war that has never happened. Right. So the point of war is that it will then come upon you with a vengeance. Right?
Let's do one more question. We're going to do one more question.
Yeah.
It's fascinating. I think we could go all night because everybody has really interesting, good questions. One more question, though. Somebody maybe has that.
Yes, ma'am. Yeah, Sindhu. The Persians called, they couldn't say S, so they said H supposedly, yeah.
My question is that there are still some people that are to the west of the Indus River that didn't get converted. They also call themselves Hindu. Like there are still Hindus in Afghanistan.
Yeah.
They call themselves Hindus.
Yeah.
And there are also people in Indonesia, in Bali, they call themselves also Hindu.
But the Indonesian Bali story is very simple. I mean, it's the Indian Ocean roots.
Yes, but my question is, does being Hindu
Yeah.
address these people also?
Of course.
Or is it limited to just the Indians of one?
No, not at all. Look, I mean, again, we go back to the same fundamental point. To be Hindu is to understand certain basic principles. Now, you can understand those principles in Timbuktu also. Tomorrow you say, I have a colony in Mars. So then will Dharma end in Mars? No. Like imagine asking Krishna that, well, I mean, now we have destroyed the earth clearly. Now we're going to go to Mars, led by Elon Musk. So like, what's going to happen to Dharma? He's going to be like, well, I mean, you saw the universe inside me. So like, Mars is also part of the universe. So Dharma is going to be there too. Tough luck. I mean, the wheel of karma will turn in Mars also. No, I mean, I'm obviously putting it lightly, but I mean, that's the logic. We cannot, I mean, these are all, I just feel that we are so concerned about building these identity markers saying, this is mine and that is mine, sure, but the principles, that's why we say Sanatana-Dharma. We say Sanatana-Dharma because it's the law of the universe. And what is the law of the universe? What is karma? I mean, you keep saying karma, people say karma. What is karma finally, right? Karma is if you do, as Gandhiji understood, if you do well, what comes back to you will be well. Now, you could say, I detest the word Hindu, but that doesn't change the fact that if you are nice to your neighbor will be nice back to you, most likely, right? You can say, I don't want to, how dare you say Hindu, like I don't want all this paganism and whatever, right? Sure. But the laws the laws that govern the universe will roll on. That doesn't mean, I mean, this is, again, I want to clarify, and especially since Neha is sitting here, I'm very scared of Neha. So I always clarify these things. That does not mean that you should be open to being subsumed, and if somebody attacks you, you can't do anything. No. I'm only saying that we have to have a deeper sense of where the philosophies come from. That's all. Because you can be the most strident voice, but if you're not tapped into the deeper philosophies, it doesn't mean anything in the long run. That's my simple, sort of short submission. And yeah, I mean, the Hindus in Afghanistan are also, we can discuss it offline, but whatever is left in Afghanistan, they are following the same principles. So, like, sure.
Thank you everyone for coming. And just to give you, first of all, thank you, Hindol. And to give you a sense of, to give you a sense of how long this has been in the making, I actually approached him 2 years ago in Goa when we met for the first time, and I had read about him, heard his talks, and read his book back then, the Indian version. And so I reached out to him, and just around the same time I had joined Jeev Mukti. I was just so blown away with the setup Austin and Bobby have here. It's like nothing I've experienced before in all of New York, and I've been to 15 yoga studios before and landing on this one. I was like, I'm never leaving this. So I talked to Austin, I talked to Bobby, and we had this fascinating, I think we had hundreds of such fascinating discussions about what Dharma is, what Shakti is, and me being a person who grew up in the cultural environment where this was so naturally coming to me, and trying to explain it in my own words and struggling to find words. And then so immediately I thought of his book, and I thought, okay, this is such a perfect blend of bringing together these two things. I have to make this happen. Incidentally, in the same conference, I met this wonderful person called Harikiran Vadlamani, and he was around the same time setting up this book club called the Indic Book Club. And the motto was to preserve, protect, and promote Indic thought. And he explicitly says Indic thought, not Indian thought, not Bharatiya thought. He specifically uses Indic thought because there's no limit to Indic thought, and not just Hinduism but Buddhism, Sikhism, Jainism are the four major religions that or the philosophical schools that happened in India. And so he is working towards bringing together all of these people, these thinkers, this work, and the artists and musicians, all of them, to bring them together and to help protect, promote, and preserve what they have to offer. And so I think this is the perfect example of what we've been trying to accomplish here. And thank you for providing this amazing, beautiful venue.
Yes, thank you very much. Thanks a lot.
And thank you for finding the time. It's been 2 years since I've been trying to
great
be
fun.
here. And it has to be, it has to be fate that I was again trying to pester him, and I found out that he's in New York. I said, okay, now this is the most opportune time, and I'm going to make it happen. So that's how it happened. So thank you all for making this.
Yes, thank you very much for coming. I'm happy to continue conversations afterwards. I'm happy to sign books afterwards, and for anybody who's interested.
And there are samosas over there.
We have refreshments over here, and we do have books for sale out at the front desk. So if you'd like, so this is the second edition, right?
Yes.
And it's the American edition.
Yeah.
So
it's gone into many editions in India, but this is the first American edition.
I have a cover with Shiva on it. I like
That's right. You have the
and so this one has a cover of
Krishna.
on it.
Yeah. We're trying to fester pluralism even in the covers of my books.
Now the next one I have the
That's right, yeah.
Okay. So thank you guys for coming.
Thanks a lot. Thank you. Thank you.